All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone got some caffeine, maybe connected with someone new, because connection is really important. This next section is going to be partly about social neuroscience, partly about education neuroscience. I'm Matt Lieberman. I'll be chairing the session, and we have 5 talks in this session. We'll have a coffee break somewhere in the middle of those talks, either after number 2 or after number 3. And our first talk, our first speaker in this session is Janet Schwartz. She is at the best named center I have ever seen in my life, the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University. And she's going to be speaking to us about practical insights from Ulysses, how pre-commitment helps goal achievement.
Thank you. Good morning. Konnichiwa. This is my first time in Tokyo, and it has been absolutely a delightful and wonderful trip, especially as a consumer and a scientist who studies self-control, because I find myself having a tremendous amount of difficulty with self-control. Okay. So I'm going to talk about basically the consumer side of things and how we actually do some of the research with companies in helping them to leverage some of these insights from behavioral science into things that can be used in the marketplace. And I'm really focused on interventions that are inexpensive to run. They improve things for the firm, and they also improve things for the consumer. So I think it's in the spirit of what Eric was saying earlier in his very nice address, is that we want to help everybody, right? So we want to grow the pie for everybody using these insights. So most of my research is on health decision-making and financial decision-making a little bit more recently. And the way that I like to think about these things is that all of our decisions, almost all of our choices as a consumer, every decision is a financial decision. Every decision is a health decision. It's not just these one-off big-time decisions that we make. All of our choices every day can be thought of in these terms, and that also gives us a lot of opportunity to make changes, and essentially small changes that add up over time. So when we think about all of the decisions that people have to make, we know that all of these decisions involve trade-offs, right? So whether people are eating too much or they're overspending on food or entertainment, it means that they have less money for things that are important, things like rent, like utilities, savings. And in my research, what we look at is the impact of this on low to middle income people, right? So how does overspending on coffee or treats or video games or stuffed animals or whatever it is impact our ability to save for things in the long term? Low to middle income families in the United States tend to live paycheck to paycheck, so there's little room for error. If they make a mistake, it can end up costing them a lot of money in fees or extra interest. And so there's no buffer against some of the shocks that happen when you make poor financial decisions. So how do we help people make better financial decisions over time? One of the things that we know, and that Eric touched on earlier in his address, is that making choices is difficult. We don't have a lot of time and resources to weigh the financial or health impact of every single decision. And of course, all of these decisions, it's not one cheeseburger that makes you have heart disease later in life. It's not one extra set of Candy Crush lives that makes you have poor savings in the future. It's the cumulative effect of all of these things. And in our busy days, in our busy times, just even trying to navigate the Tokyo subway system, we don't have a lot of resources to financially weigh the decision or the cost of every single financial decision. And so we tend to rely on basically our emotions, our intuitions, our gut, our habits. These things can be very powerful. They can lead us in a very good direction, but they can also derail our decisions, right? So we fall into bad habits where we choose the path of least resistance, right? One of the things that I have found that's so tempting in my trip to Tokyo is this Suica card. So I'm assuming that I am not the only person that has one of these. And it's wonderful for getting around the subway, but it also allows me to get whatever I want from whatever vending machine or convenience store. And this is incredibly tempting, right? So instead of waiting until I get someplace to sit and have a nice meal, it's now even easier for me to get a snack. And part of it is when I'm depleted of my resources and I have poor self-control, relying on my intuitions, my bad habits, and my heuristics can lead to costly mistakes, right? Our decisions are highly influenced by the context in which we are making them, and they're highly biased by the world around us. And as I said, the marketplace is not helping, right? So we may have intentions to save our money and to do things that are healthy, but the Sawika card is helping us get rid of all of these things, right? So all of the convenience in the modern world is really pulling us in a different direction than our goals, which is basically to save money and to be a little bit healthier. So these are some of my favorite examples, are things that are so much easier. So I may wake up in the morning having wonderful intentions to have not eat donuts, and then the problem is that if I'm within, thank you to geofencing, if I'm within 2 blocks of a Dunkin' Donuts will let me know that there's a deal waiting for me. The same thing with Candy Crush lives, right? So whatever video game that you play, but this is really tempting, right? So they give you a couple of lives for free, and then you get so entrenched, and you just can't. You're sitting on the metro, you're bored, you're tired, and then just for like another $1 or 100 yen, you can have 600 more Candy Crush lives. And this is incredibly powerful in the marketplace, right? It's presenting these competing forces. I was very inspired in the Tokyo subway when I looked and I said, now this is a great example of a nudge. If you take the stairs, it shows you how many calories you're burning as you're going up the stairs, which is, I think this is very nice. I know that Tokyo is getting ready for the Olympics. I was like, this is really, really wonderful. I guess I'll see this every place, but no. This is also what you see, right? So it's an escalator that goes up 5 sets of stairs, right? Or only 5 stairs. So we see again that there are these competing forces, right, all around us. And part of the issue, and I think some of the neuroscientists can probably speak better to this, is that most of our decisions, or when we're thinking about the long-term consequences of our decisions, or whether it's in terms of health or financial decision-making, we tend to think of things in terms of now or versus later, right? So in the present, there's lots of temptation. We have poor self-control. What we're feeling right now is so real to us, and what we may be feeling in the future is very abstract. We can't identify with the future self. And so we tend to discount the future. We don't care about the future so much when we're hot and we're tired, and we just want to take our Sawika card out and just get whatever is so easy for us at the vending machine. But of course, this makes us vulnerable to financial and health time bombs, right? So if you think about things like mortgages and loans and saving for retirement, these are all good decisions that require us to have some long-term planning. And how do we make good decisions about these types of financial products, or how do we make good decisions about health choices? So some of the things that we study in our lab is trying to get people away from mortgages that allow them only to pay the interest. So it's basically like a huge credit card loan in which you never actually own anything. You're just paying off the interest over time. There's lots of loans examples where there's a teaser loan rate. So it's a very good interest rate at the start, or maybe no interest at the start, but then 6 months later, now you're paying 7 or 8% interest. So this feels good in the present, but of course in the long term, it is terrible for your financial goals. And then also we think about, particularly in the US, we don't have pension plans at most companies. Most employees don't have this, and so we have to think about saving for our own retirement and making sure that we essentially build our own pension plan. And that, of course, sends the tension between now and later even more. So how can we help? what are some of the ways that behavioral scientists or policymakers think about helping people make better decisions in the present so that they can have better financial and healthier lives in the future? So one of the things that we do is we increase people's awareness. I think somebody mentioned it yesterday, and it was really very nice. Sometimes as behavioral scientists, we knock information, but we do live in the information age. There is some app that will tell you exactly the number of calories you are eating. You can take a picture of the food now, and it'll calculate the number of calories, and it'll calculate how much you have to walk in order to move this off. So it is possible to increase people's awareness about problems and about how to do things that help them make better decisions. We can improve financial literacy, we can improve people's health literacy, and we can give them lots of information to help them identify the source of problems or particular pitfalls. So, in the United States, we know that only a third of Americans have $0 saved for retirement. Now, when you are tasked with funding most of your retirement, this is a very, very, very low number of people who have anything saved for retirement. And then the amount of credit card debt is absolutely massive, right? So it's about $5,000 per household, but keep in mind that this is about 10% of the household income for the average American family. So, and this is revolving credit. This is credit that is very, very difficult to pay off, particularly if you continue to spend. So how do behavioral scientists deal with this reality of the marketplace is that we now have these incredibly well-informed consumers. They know everything. There's no, we live in the age of information, of Google. Everything is in front of it's at our touch, right? It's right in front of us all the time. But we also know from behavioral science research that information in and of itself, while it's incredibly valuable, has very little power to change people's behavior in and of itself. Financial decisions, health decisions are particularly challenging. Why? Because they're complex and they require self-control. And it's the ongoing and persistent type of self-control that scientists have found is so what we call depleting, right? So when you are trying to save money all day long on every single financial decision, when you're trying to eat well every single meal, you constantly have to exercise self-control, and this is very taxing. And it's not that people don't have good intentions. People have very good intentions. Every morning we wake up and we say, I'm not going to spend money on energy drinks with my Suica card, or I'm not going to eat anything that's bad for me. We wake up with these good intentions. We know that certain behaviors are not in our long-term interests. We know that we're going to overspend. We know that we're going to undersave, borrow too much. So we know that lack of information is not necessarily the problem, and lack of motivation isn't necessarily the problem. What the problem is that we just don't have good self-control, right? And so how, as behavioral scientists, can we think about ways to activate self-control, not making everybody have great self-control all the time, but how do we get people to have better moment-to-moment self-control in some of these decisions? Okay, so one approach to self-control kind of capitalizes on the idea that many people are often sophisticated about their self-control problems. And what I mean by sophisticated is just that we're self-aware. So we limit our temptation by imposing restrictions on ourselves, right? So maybe I don't have a Suica card so that I can't use it to do anything other than pay for my commuting. Or maybe I don't buy potato chips and cookies and keep them in the house because they're going to call to me and I'll be tempted to eat them. So we know that people are willing to pay a premium for what we call small quantities of vices. So people who smoke cigarettes actually do not buy cartons of cigarettes, right? They prefer to buy them by the pack, which is irrational to economists because it costs them more money in the long run, but it also is healthier for them. So they presumably restrict their access to things that are very tempting in order to make sure that they don't over consume and challenge their self-control resources. And one of the things that we've studied is incredibly effective is what we call these Ulysses pacts, right? So this is basically pre-committing yourself to a course of action. Either you can't change that course of action, or if you don't behave the way that you're supposed to, you impose a penalty on yourself for doing this. So why are these called Ulysses pacts? So they're called Ulysses pacts. This is not something that was thought of originally by any behavioral scientist, but perhaps the earliest behavioral scientist, Homer himself. And this, of course, is the story of Ulysses. So Ulysses is sailing with his crew, and he knows that he has to sail past the sirens, and he knows that this is a terrible fate, that the call of the sirens is going to be so powerful that they're going to be tempted to leap into the water as the sirens sing their beautiful song, and of course, they will leap into certain death. And so what does Ulysses do, right? He does two things. So the most famous thing that we know is that he ties himself to the mast. He says to his crew, I want you to tie me to the mast. I want to be able to hear the call of the sirens, but I don't want to be able to leap into the water. So he ties himself to the mast, but he also, incidentally, what I think is a little bit more effective in the marketplace is that depending on the version of the story that you hear, Ulysses tells his crew to either stuff wax in their ears or to go below deck. So if they go below deck or they stuff wax in their ears, they never even hear it. They never even tempt it. They're never even tempted to jump into the water. And this is a very, very nice, actionable thing for us to do in the marketplace, right? So it's not what Google has in mind for us, it's not what Facebook has in mind for us, but sometimes just taking that app off your phone removes all the tension that you feel. Now you can't go after the sirens because it's just not there. So you can't overindulge if you don't even feel that pressure of self-control. Where do we see this in the marketplace? We see lots of opportunities for this in the marketplace. So these are just a couple of examples. So one is these time-locked boxes. So you can have cookies in the house, but they only let you open the box for 5 minutes at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then the box locks and you can't open it anymore. Here's a great example of an alarm clock, right? So a very old school alarm clock, right? So it's not on your phone, but basically you put this in your room someplace, and in the morning it jumps up and it shoots out these puzzle pieces, and the only way to get the alarm to turn off is to put the puzzle back together. So now you're out of bed and you're awake and you're ready for the gym. And then one of my favorites is one of these that you put it on your phone and it restricts you can lock or block your ability to text certain numbers from at certain hours. So this is very nice for college students, right? So if there's somebody that's going to be sending you, or you're tempted to rendezvous with at 2 o'clock in the morning, but then the next morning maybe you regret that, there is something here for you. Okay, so there are many ways in which you can think about how commitment devices or restricting your ability to access that thing, that person, whatever it is, this will help you in the marketplace. Okay, so I'm going to tell you quickly about 2 experiments that we have done testing various forms of commitment devices in the marketplace. The first one is a series of studies that we did at Panda Express, which is a fast food chain in the United States. It's incredibly popular, and one of the most popular dishes, or the most popular dish, is this orange chicken. It's like a General Tso's chicken. It's incredibly delicious. It is 85% of their sales. There's no way that Panda Express was going to let us try to nudge people away from orange chicken towards broccoli. And that's not even a good idea. I think Eric is smiling, right? So it's like, we're not going to get customers to not eat orange chicken, but we might be able to get them to take slightly smaller portions of rice. So at Panda Express, you get, I don't know what this is in kilos, but it's almost a pound of rice as a side dish. It's 14 ounces is the side dish. It's 2 heaping scoops. It's about 500 or 600 calories, right? So you think about the orange chicken is already 400 calories, and now you're adding 600 calories or 500 calories in rice, and you just don't need that many calories. So we thought maybe we could get people to downsize their meals, right? Maybe we could get people to take a little bit less rice. For those of you who are fans of behavioral economics, that is indeed Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist, who is my co-author on this paper. And here he is offering people downsized fast food. Okay, so basically we ran a very, very simple experiment in Panda Express, in which we measured, how many people come into Panda Express and ask for smaller portions, right? And then we said, in one condition, we said, do you want to cut 200 calories from your meal? No discount, nothing, no incentive for you, by taking half a portion of your side dish, so rice or noodles. So these starchy side dishes that have lots of calories but aren't really the focal part of the meal. And then we tested various versions of this, but this was a very, very simple intervention. So there's a baseline condition, there's no discount and a smaller portion, and then there's a smaller discount or a smaller portion with a discount. Anybody want to raise their hand and let me know what they think was the most effective condition? How many people think, what are people's predictions for the baseline condition? How many people do this spontaneously? Nobody, right? What about for no incentive? What about with an incentive? 25 cents, just 25 cents. Okay, so people's prediction is that the incentive is going to matter here, right? So they're only going to downsize for an incentive. Okay, so if we look at the data itself, we see in the baseline condition, you guys are absolutely correct. Nobody spontaneously downsizes their meals. And then in the no discount condition, so this is the condition that everybody thinks is going to be maybe a little bit better than baseline, but not so much better than baseline, a third of the people were willing to do it. We then go back to baseline. Is there any learning that's happening in Panda Express when this happens? Absolutely not. People take what's put in front of them. Incidentally, the logic behind doing this experiment is based on this idea of mindless eating, right? So I'm going to be satisfied with whatever you put in front of me. If you put 5 ounces of rice in front of me, I'm happy and satiated when I'm finished with that. And if you put 10 ounces of rice in front of me, I eat twice as much rice, but there's no difference in the satiety. Okay, and then what happened when we downsized with the discount? Basically, again, a third of the people. So it wasn't really the discount that was driving people's behavior here, right? So it's some desire to have the smaller portions. And again, people are not necessarily expecting a discount in order to do this, right? They're willing to do it for no discount at all, presumably because it restricts their ability to overeat. I just want to make sure that you understand that we know that people actually ate less because we did weigh their garbage. Okay, so that was one of the requests that the reviewers had. They said, well, people who get 10 ounces of rice, they just leave 5 ounces of rice over. They don't. Whatever you're served, you eat. So if you're served 10 ounces of rice, you eat 10 ounces of rice. And what we saw over the entire many studies that we ran was that on average, people ate 100 fewer calories when we were in Panda Express running our experiment than when we were not in Panda Express running our experiment, right? So this is no cost to Panda Express, of course, to give people less rice, but better for consumers and making them feel like they have a healthier experience. We also followed up with consumers to make sure that they didn't feel deprived, that they had only gotten a half portion of rice, and none of the participants complained that they were more hungry later on in the day. Okay, so we then took our show on the road all the way from Panda Express in Durham, North Carolina, to Discovery Health, which is a big health insurance company in South Africa. And they were really interesting to us because they have what's called the Vitality Rewards Program. So it's a healthy points program. Basically, it works like frequent flyer miles, where you get healthy points for doing healthy things like going to the gym, going to the doctor, getting your flu shot, all of the things that we want people to do. And one of the most interesting benefits they had was this grocery store benefit, which is basically you get a 25% discount on all of your healthy food, vegetables, lean meat, fat-free dairy. But despite this incredibly generous discount, the program is tremendously underutilized, right? So what Vitality was finding was that only a third of eligible groceries were actually being purchased by people who had paid to become part of the Vitality program, had signed up extra to be getting this healthy food benefit. So presumably they really, really want to take advantage of this program, and yet they're not. So we also wanted to see whether or not we could get people to pre-commit to buying healthier groceries at Pick and Pay, which is one of the large grocery chains in the, I think they're in the UK and in South Africa. So we actually had a very, very simple design and a very, very simple request of the customers in the Vitality program. And we said, we want you to make a commitment to increasing the percentage of healthy food that you buy at Pick and Pay by 5 percentage points over your household baseline. So imagine that Eric's family is very, very healthy. They're at 50% of all of their groceries. We're just asking them to go to 55%. Joe's family, not so good. Those guys, only 10%. We're just asking them to go 15%. So it's customized to each family's spending habits. Also, you'll notice with this design, we're not so interested in Eric's family. He's already being healthy, but this is a very low-cost, low-risk nudge for the Devlin household. Okay, so basically, we pre-committed, or we asked participants, the Vitality members, to sign a 6-month contract where they put their 25% discount on the line. If you go to the grocery store every month and you buy healthier food, you go up from 10 to 15%, you get to keep your 25% discount, which comes on your credit card. But if you don't, we claw it back. So there's a line on your credit card that says, here's your healthy food discount. And then there's a line underneath it if you don't meet your goal that says healthy food reversal. Okay, so we take away your discount, and we do this, it resets every month, right? So you have to increase your, over that fixed historical baseline. You get 6 tries, and you can opt out after the first month, but then that's it. You're not allowed to, I'm sorry, that's not true. You couldn't opt out until after the first month. So we had to have 1 month in which this was actually a binding decision. So, of course, there's no reason to do this from an economist's perspective. You're not gaining anything by signing yourself up for a program in which you can only lose money, right? You either keep the discount that Vitality was always going to pay you, or you're going to lose money in this scheme. Okay, so our primary research questions were, is there any interest in this, right? What percentage of the participants would be willing to do a program like this, particularly because there's no additional incentive, and there's only the threat of a loss. And then conditional on people having the opportunity to do this, and presumably some of them will do it, is it actually going to change their behavior over time, right? So what is the power of this type of a nudge? And I wouldn't even call this a nudge, right? This is a shove. Right, so like pre-commitment is a shove. Okay, so did anyone really try this? Any predictions about the percentage of people? A third. Do you think it worked? Do you think the households that pre-committed actually purchased healthier food? Half of them, you think? Ah, very good. These are very precise estimates. And do you think that anybody lost money? Yeah. Okay, oh my God. Joe is really good. A third of the customers that we invited to participate made the 5 percentage point pledge. Did they go up? Yes. So we asked them to go up 5 percentage points, and on average, what we see in the treatment group is that they went up 3.5 percentage points. It's very nice. On average, people buy about 100 things at the grocery store every month, and so this means that we saw fewer Coca-Cola, chips, cookies, and a little bit more broccoli and fat-free yogurt and those type of things. Did households lose money? You bet. So only a third of the households that pre-committed were able to actually do this. And I say this because this just tells us how hard it is to get people to change their behavior. So again, this is a program that they signed up for, they weren't doing well, we gave them this commitment device, and yet still only a third of the households did it. But from a policy perspective, the results are very nice because just offering the treatment versus control group, we see that the average of the entire population is being brought up by the people who are willing to do it. Very similar to the rates at which we saw this with the Panda Express experiment. So because only a third of the households were successful each month, that meant that Vitality recouped $50,000 in forfeitures. Now, that can raise all sorts of issues if you think about what's going to happen with the money that gets forfeited, but customers never complained about this, and I think part of the reason that customers never complained about this was because they had agency in this decision. This was a self-imposed penalty, not a Vitality-imposed penalty. But again, what I also think is very interesting about this is that this is cost neutral for Vitality to run from this perspective. So this is not a nudge that's going, and this is a huge issue for a lot of companies and for a lot of governments, is that the cost of doing these nudges can be prohibitively expensive, particularly if they can't scale. And so these are small changes in behavior, but they're effective changes in behavior when we look at what scientists like to call that intention to treat analysis. We just offer it versus don't offer it. It's really good. The entire population does a little bit better if we offer it than if we don't. And that, of course, is a key policy question. And the cost effectiveness is very high because Vitality is not spending money to change this type of behavior. Okay, so there are a couple of other questions, and I noticed this when people had their Twitter type questions, like, what are some of the over or spillover effects of doing this? Like, how long does the intervention last? Are there, do people stop exercising? As a Vitality program, we also get their exercise behavior. And so because we did this study for such a long time with them, we have access to all sorts of data. I think I did mention that the participants or the households were allowed to opt out after the first month, but we saw that that was very unlikely to happen. So fewer than 15 percentage points of the household, 15% of the households dropped out, even though they were being penalized for not making their goal, right? So we didn't see a lot of attrition in this study, which can make longitudinal studies very, very difficult. Also, at the end of the study, we asked people, would you do it again? Like, do you think that this is something that you would try again? And 2/3 of the participants said that they would pre-commit again. And they said that they would try it in other things, smoking cessation, going to the gym, that they thought that commitment devices were a good way to help them change their behavior. And we know that these are people, of course, who have self-selected to be in the Vitality program, but we know that just wanting to be healthier doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be healthier. And then, of course, how long did the effect last? So that was one of the questions that came up in Eric's talk. What happens when you remove the incentive, right? That's another big policy question for so many of these studies. They're like, how long do we have to keep these incentives going in order to change people's behavior? Is it ever that they become internalized? I think that was what somebody had asked. And how long did the effect last? For a full 6 months after we stopped penalizing people. So they were, I'll show you kind of in the graph here, so you can see the control group and then the people who were in the treatment group but did not make the commitment. Their trend line for the healthy percentage of food goes down over time. You also see this downward trend because it's going from summer to winter in South Africa, so everything is upside down, so seasonality in the data. But you see with the committed people in the treatment condition, that basically their healthy percentage goes up right at the beginning of the study, and then it stays level throughout the duration of the study. And then we were able to see that the effect persisted at 75% of its original effect size for a full 6 months after the study ended, which is, of course, a very nice finding, because you want to say, are there ways in which we can get people to change their behavior in a way that lasts and sticks with them over time? Okay. So we do know that people are sophisticated. They're self-aware about their self-control problems, and they're willing to make a one-time decision to limit their future behavior. They'll keep trying, right? So nobody's going to give up. Nobody likes to give up their gym membership. Nobody likes to quit Weight Watchers and think, oh, it's over, never going to be able to do it. Commitment devices are effective and scalable, right? They can be cost-effective for firms, and they can be incorporated into better incentive design, things that can really be sustainable for companies over time. And then I'm going to wrap up because now I'm a little bit over. But how do we get people, or what, some of the things that we can think about in terms of discussion questions are, how do we get people to think more about their future selves, right? How do we get people to care about what they buy and have in front of them at the grocery store, so that they're not tempted at home, or they're not tempted when they go to fast food restaurants? We can think about this also in terms of spending, right? So how do we get people to set up rainy day funds, save a little bit more for retirement, plan better diets, plan opportunities to exercise? And we can also think about what types of commitment contracts people would really want, right? Do we want more things? I mean, to me, it's all about restricting my access to the tyranny on my phone, right? So I love all of the convenience of all of these apps and games and ability to shop, but it also is, incredibly tempting in terms of self-control. And so how do we restrict our access to certain things so that we're present in our own lives and it's not so tempting? And then I think what happens if people fail at first when they pre-commit to something, right? So we don't want to have commitment devices that are so restrictive or so penalizing that it alienates customers. We have to think about how to do this in a way that's flexible and helps people learn and change over time. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. That was an excellent talk. Very, very interesting data. If there are questions from the audience, people obviously can come up to the microphone. I'm going to start with a kind of conceptual question, if it's okay. So self-control is an interesting phrase, and I don't know if it's actually the same in Japanese, but in English, you can think of self-control as the self being in control, or you can think of self-control as the self is the thing being controlled. And it seems like when you talk about traditional self-control, put the rice in front of me and I have to not eat the 5 extra ounces versus making a pre-commitment, it seems to be toggling between those two different ways of thinking of self-control. So do you have a sense of sort of how the psychology might be different between those? And is the pre-commitment, do you have evidence that it is less depleting and allows for other kinds of self-control then to be more successful?
So I think these are great questions, right? Because it's that tension, and part of it is that, when the rice bowl is in front of you, it does become, you lose your agency, right? So if you think of self-control and you being in control of your decisions and your environment, which is how economists think, they don't think about temptation in the same way, is that you are always in control and nothing is in control of you. And I think that what happens is that as soon as the phone comes on, as soon as the rice is in, whatever your vice is, it starts to control you. And that becomes where this tension is. And so I do think that removing that psychological tension and having to exercise the self-control muscle is just better, right? It just makes it easier for you to have self-control. It's so much easier for me to just have half a portion of rice if I order half a portion of rice than if I'm halfway through the rice and I tell myself, okay, now you have to stop.
And do you think that is exercising the self-control muscle if it's sort of preset for me ahead of time?
I think it's avoiding having to engage the self-control muscle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Any questions from the audience? Oh, yeah, we have one over here.
Madame.
Thank you very much for this very exciting talk. I have a question now that is a bit bigger picture, not necessarily related to your research that you presented, but to kind of what you as a researcher in some ways stand for, which is very interesting for the people here in the room, because you're one of those academics that has been working on to produce these nice data sets. You're relying on working with companies. And now, given the goal of this conference is to bring together companies and academics, I was wondering whether you have some advice for people like us, like academics. What should I do? What would be your best advice to work with companies? What are the expectations we should have? Which is difficult, and maybe then also taking the other perspective, is there any advice you would have for companies here in the room that would be interested in engaging, working with academics? I know it's a challenging question to answer.
No, but it's my life. I live it every day, and so we have had a lot of experience working with companies. A big challenge is that the goals of the company and the goals of academics are not always aligned. And so my incentive is to publish academic papers, and your incentive is to have actionable data for business decisions tomorrow, right? Or if you're Emmanuel Macron, you don't want to run a study with Vitality for 1.5 years, 2 years, 3 years. You don't have that capability. So my advice is that you have these conversations and what the expectations are at the outset. And you start working together closely, and you really have to think about what your data is going to look like, what the resources and demands for the company are going to be. And you really have to listen to each other. In both the Panda Express and the Vitality experiments, what we were proposing was very counterintuitive to them. They were like, you're going to take food away from our fast food customers? They come here for extra food. That's our business model, right? And Vitality doesn't want to alienate their customers. So we really had to work with them very closely and for a long time to get them to trust that this was something that was going to work on in the long run. And so my advice to you is to do small things together first and build trust and show each other how to communicate before you go into this. Now, if you have a Dan Ariely or a Dick Thaler that will come in and convince somebody in the company, that's great, but it's even a challenge for these people, right? So this is the reality of doing this, is that a lot of what we're testing as academics is not stuff that's tried and true. It's novel, it's interesting, it's going to help us get published in a journal, and then it can be very counterintuitive for the managerial people, the boots on the ground. So I say start out small and really build a working relationship together. Your project will be more successful if you care about each other than if you just care about the data or the bottom line.
Okay, so we're going to take one Slido question, and then we are going to move along so we can try to stick to the schedule. So when you showed your figure in the last study, you showed that there were still effects at 6 months out. But one of the questions is about what happens after that. Is it just that data wasn't collected? Because it still looked like there was... It wasn't as if you showed that the gap closed at 7 months, it's that you just didn't show data.
So we had 6 months of data from the baseline. Mm-hmm. We have 6 months of data from the experiment itself. And then, I don't know if it was in there, but then we stopped the commitment device. Everybody goes back to getting their discount at the end. And then we see the effect persist an additional 6 months with no incentive, no feedback. And then it just kind of closes. And I will say also that when we looked at the data, of course, the data is so beautiful. Like, we know every single thing that people buy. And a lot of the change was it was very much a learning effect. So at the beginning, people we saw a lot of switching from full-fat milk to skim milk, skin-on chicken breast to skinless chicken breast. And I think once people had made these changes, that was it. Now I buy skinless chicken breast, or now I buy skim milk. And these were the things that were able to persist. And, getting people to stop buying cookies and candy and stuff like that, they could do that for a month or two, but that's not where this intervention effect took place. It was really on smaller changes. And I think that's so much of what I think is important, is that we're not going to get people to give up Coca-Cola. By the way, the #1 product sold in South Africa, if you're a branding aficionado, at the grocery store, millions and millions of transactions, is indeed Coca-Cola. And people didn't stop buying that. They're never going to stop buying that. So we have to think of ways to get them to change small behaviors in other ways. So smaller Coke is good. You don't need a 35-ounce Coke. But we still, we don't want a world with no Coca-Cola, right? It makes our brains happy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.